fit hits the shan, or all hell breaks loose. There are a couple things that you can do to prepare for the eventuality, because at some point your company will experience a crisis. It may not come when you think, but at some point in the history of every company, there is a crisis that it experiences. And so it's always good to be prepared. Better be prepared in advance and it not happen for a long time than to not be prepared and have to scramble. So, some recommendations. Again, from the vantage point of your role as a key communications professional or expert. Okay. One, assess the potentially vulnerable spots in your company. Where do you think there are possible areas along the lines that we've outlined where you might have a crisis? It's not hard to do a little bit of projection. You can look at the history of your industry. If your company is involved in energy, think about what happened to BP. If you're involved in the oil business, sooner or later it is likely that your company could have an oil spill, a la Exxon Valdez, an explosion, loss of life, a la BP, Shell having problems in Africa. So there are areas where you could predict something could possibly happen to your company. Be prepared to say something or to at least be focused on those areas. As a communications person, we saw this in the Enron case. Kelly put her finger on it. It looked like the communications and PR people were just completely out of the loop. It's always a good thing to be in concert with or in contact with the legal department of your company and the operations, whatever that might be, the business side, the finance side, etc. Always a good idea as a communications expert, professional, to know and be in close contact with, have them on your speed dial, the legal team, and maybe the HR, the operations team, and work with them to establish a crisis communications protocol. Right? What do we do? And we'll talk about protocol in a little while. But what do we do? Who's going to, when the things do come down, when it all hits the fan, so to speak, who's going to do what? Better to have those roles defined in advance than it is to try to do it as it unfolds. Your company should have an in-company crisis team. That would be, varies from company to company, but it could be clearly somebody in the legal, obviously somebody in communications, PR, maybe somebody on the finance side, clearly somebody from the board or related to the board. But together there should be a team of people, and they may not always be very senior people, but they may be representatives of very senior people, right? And they should be, you should be coordinating with that crisis team to make sure that, again, in the eventuality, in the event that something happens, you are in touch with them. You know who to go to, where to go, what to see, what to do. Make sure the roles are clear. How about establishing a short list of outside experts that you're going to call on for the crisis? Every company has, or should have, a group of professionals, a PR firm, outside legal counsel, maybe some financial auditors, maybe a social media specialist that they work with and rely upon for a number of things, but certainly they will rely upon these people, these experts, in the event of a crisis. Right? You know, if in the event of a crisis, I want to make sure I got Amir on my team handling all the media stuff. He's going to be one of the outside experts. So it may not be your responsibility to do that as a communications person. I'm not suggesting that you have to pull all these people together, but you should know where they are. You should know how to access them and where to, how to engage them once things happen. And then you should establish practice. Review these things, this protocol once every quarter, twice a year, perhaps. Go through a drill. Figure out what would happen if you're in the airline business. God forbid, a plane crashes. What's the first thing we do? Well, they have a protocol. They know what to do. You're in the, you represent a technology company, and your data was breached, and all 500,000 or 2 million of your customers' data is out there. Well, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? What do you say first? Do you say, oops? What is it that you say? So establish that and practice that, and keep in mind that from period to period, it's going to change. What you said 6 months ago and you practice may not be relevant 6 months from now, because the market has changed, maybe your business has fundamentally changed. Okay, so those are some of the things to think about. So what about when the crisis is going on? It's actually happening. You're in the midst of it. Enron, everything's falling apart. So what do? You have first be prepared to engage the crisis from the very beginning. So that means you're prepared. Secondly, look at the nature of this challenge, crisis, issue. What are we really faced with here? Well, in Enron, it was not a natural disaster. It wasn't an act of God, but it was a combination of a whole bunch of other things: financial, personal, governance, administrative, etc. A lot of things came together there. So it was very complex that they had to address. And then while it's going on, determine the area of most harm or risk. If this crisis, remember crisis also, when we talked about definitions, is something that if left unattended could really do you damage, do your company damage. So if left unattended, what happens here? Does your stock go down? So if that's the sort of the most egregious risk that's going to happen, maybe you address the financial community with a series of messages. Well, if it's a customer-facing, consumer-facing issue, product recall, product tampering, death of somebody who used your product. Well, that's the primary focus. Then you're going to be talking to the public. Yes, investors are important, but you're going to be talking to the public, reassuring them that your product and the safety mechanisms, the safety protocols that you have used really are secure. So assess what kind of risk, what kind of crisis you're involved with, and that's going to determine what your strategy is. So assess the level of exposure. Are we talking about a lawsuit here? If it's a lawsuit, you might not want to say anything, or it's not good to say nothing all the time, but you might not want to have a full-blown strategy where you are talking to the media extensively. If you know you're going to go into litigation, and this is something that's going to be settled by the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court or something like that, your talking points might be very limited. Okay, so you got to figure out, and that I suggest there are going to be other people who are addressing this. So your legal team is going to be addressing the level of exposure. Maybe you're somebody else, maybe your CEO, they're going to be looking at it from the business impact. But as a communication specialist, your role, your job is to make sure that you know what public you're going to be talking to first and why. Okay? Convene the internal crisis team. So let's get together now. Remember we talked about knowing who they are. Well, now we're getting together because the crisis is happening. Okay? This may or may not be your job, but talk to the board and senior management. At some point, and again, going back to Kelly's point, it looked like during Enron, the PR people had no clue what the board and what the senior management was doing. But that's not a good scenario, not a good outcome. So the key would be to make sure that you are engaged at the highest possible level that you can be, so that when the messaging is being developed, and if you're being called upon to deliver the messaging, you are at least in sync with the top management of the company. Also, good to talk with the outside experts and get their perspective. Now, I must say that outside experts, and having been an outside expert advising companies, have different objectives. Not only do they have different roles, they have different objectives oftentimes. Sometimes these outside experts want to piggyback on this crisis to make themselves look good. So you've got to manage that oftentimes. You know, you see, if you watch CNN or Fox or MSNBC or any of the, you know, you see the expert PR person who's called in to talk about the implications for the Carnival Cruise Line. All right, Carnival Cruise has recently had a series of problems, and with their cruises, facilities going down, etc. So there's always the outside expert who's called in to say, well, what do you think happened here? Now, if you get that person on your team, yes, you hire them. Their job is to help you work through the crisis, but they might also be talking to the media. They're tweeting, they're Facebooking, they're talking to their constituency because they have a constituency themselves. So my only point here is that you have to coordinate. I'm assuming you are inside the company now. You have to coordinate with those individuals and make sure they know who's in charge. You can't just leave it to them to go on with that. But confer with all the outside experts. The lawyers are probably not going to give you a lot to go on. They typically don't. You know, as a lawyer, our role is to limit and mitigate risk and damage and exposure. And usually, in the view of most lawyers, that means not saying much of anything until we get to trial or someplace else. That's not always the best strategy, though. All right, I'm not suggesting that just because the legal team says we're not going to say anything, that communications should follow. But you have to have that discussion with them. And then you want to select your communications advisors. Who are you going to be working with? Who's your team? It's going to help you. You may have different people for different roles. Again, I mentioned, you may have a small company or a company that works on nothing but social media. You may have somebody who is an expert handling the investor trade press. So again, you've got to figure out what the nature of the crisis is. You may have somebody. Remember BP when they first came out, when the explosion first happened, Deepwater Horizon, and the first iteration, the first generation of the commercials after that, of the communications messaging, they were looking at, they had people from the Gulf, you know, they sort of, so the regular folks. Well, they went through several different generations of of the spokespeople, but you want to make sure that whoever's representing your company to the media, speaking for you, has the right message and you've got the right person doing it. Okay. You want to clarify the lines of communication internally. If this crisis is significant, so significant, maybe you have a complete lockdown of email. Maybe there's no internal communications going on right now because email is discoverable, meaning it can, if there's a lawsuit, anything you write can be used. Okay, so maybe someone in the company, at your advice and recommendation, says, we're not going to do any email. We're not going to communicate during this process. We're going to make sure that things are radio silent. That's just one possibility. I'm not suggesting that that's always the answer, but that is one possibility. So you establish a communications protocol. Who's going to be talking? Are you going to be saying something? Is it going to be the CEO? And if it's the CEO, who's going to be advising the CEO as to what they say? As to what he says or she says? What's your action plan? What happens after the oil spill? What happens after the lawsuit? What happens after the discrimination case? What happens after the insider trading problem? What do you do? What's the action plan? And what are your message points? Simplify it. We want to just convey three things to you here in the media. We want to convey that, first of all, we're very sorry at the loss of life that's occurred as a result of this, or the damage that's occurred. We want to make sure, we want to convey to you that this will never happen again. We put into place the mechanisms that will guard against this. And oh, by the way, we want to convey to you that we're going to make sure that everyone who was harmed by this situation, Carnival Cruise, breach of privacy, that they're going to be made whole some way or the other. Our company wants to communicate that to you. So whatever those message points are, simplify them and deliver them to your constituencies. We want to make sure, we want to ensure to all institutional investors that our performance charts are, that our performance indicators are strong, that we really are, that our company is based on something solid and fundamental. Whatever the message points are, you want to make sure that you get them to your constituencies and deliver them well. And then you can decide whether and how you reach out to the media. Oftentimes, the media will find you, and you may not have the luxury of waiting a long time, particularly, again, in today's 24-hour cycle. All right? Spend time with the CEO and the experts. And it's too late to do this in the crisis, training the CEO or training the spokespeople, but it may fall upon you as the expert to help the people in your company understand and conduct themselves in a way that puts forward the best face for your company. How to engage the media. How not to do what Skilling did, Jeffrey Skilling did when he was sitting there on the hot seat. How to appear a little bit more humble. How to deliver a message with a consistency. How to conduct yourself with the media. That's all. Those are typically learned kinds of behaviors, and clearly there's some leaders who are more adept at that, but there are many more who have learned it, and it can be learned. Okay. So with that, the whole question of a crisis happening to your company is something that is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Something's going to happen. Something will, it may be a small matter, it may be a larger matter. But there will be at some point in time when you, as the communications expert, are going to have to focus on how you will help your company deal with these crises. So with that, I'm going to stop and thank you for your attention, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other issues of the